Hello, this is Professor POTUS. Welcome to POTUS ABC Kids. Today, women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment.
Welcome to POTUS ABC Kids, hosted by my dad, Professor POTUS. POTUS ABC Kids is a fun place to learn and play. And now, here's your host, Professor POTUS.
The 19th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits state governments from denying the right to vote based on sex. And this was added to our Constitution in 1920 through Article 5, the amendment process. Now here's what's interesting. The original Constitution that was passed and ratified in 1788 did not prohibit women the right to vote, but a lot of states in America did. In fact, before the women's suffrage movement and the 19th Amendment in 1920, women were voting in states like Wyoming in 1890, Colorado in 1893, Idaho and Utah in 1896. In fact, Wyoming, there were a lot of cowboys who were looking for wives. So they told women from the East Coast, come on out to Wyoming, get yourself a cowboy for a husband, and you get the right to vote. That was going on in Wyoming back in 1890. Now here's what's interesting. Back in the early part of America, right after the Constitution was ratified in 1790, New Jersey was permitting women the right to vote. In fact, their constitution granted the right to vote to all inhabitants who were qualified. That usually meant property owners. So women who were given property because of the death of their husband were voting in New Jersey. But then in 1807, the men in the New Jersey legislature says, well, we don't like women voting, so we're going to change the Constitution. So they did just that. They amended their state constitution in 1807 to say the only people that could vote were free white male citizens. And see, that's what the 19th Amendment does. It prohibits states from denying the right to vote based on sex. And that's really important about the Constitution. Our United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights doesn't grant us these rights. These rights are natural rights or God-given rights. What it does is it puts the shackles on government so government can't deny or abridge those rights. In fact, here's the exact text of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the account of sex. So that's the text of the 19th Amendment and a little bit of the history. Now, what was going on in 1920? Well, the President of the United States was Woodrow Wilson over there, a Democrat from New Jersey, and he did not support women's suffrage originally. Now, Wilson had a couple of daughters, and his daughters had a little talk with their daddy, and they convinced their dad to support women's suffrage in the 19th Amendment, and Wilson finally did that sometime during World War I, which was happening in 1914 and 1918. And what Wilson said is he now supports women's suffrage as a wartime measure. But here's what's interesting. For a constitutional amendment to pass, it doesn't need the president. It only needs 2/3 of Congress, and that happened with the 19th Amendment, June 4th, 1990. And then 3/4 of the states have to ratify the Constitution, and that happened on August 18th, 1920. So now the 19th Amendment is a part of the Constitution, and these states here in the East, these black states that were prohibiting or denying the women the right to vote, they could no longer do that. So the 1920 election was the first election where women were voting all over America. And here's what's really neat. A total of 26 million new women were voting in the election of 1920, including 3 million African American women, and they voted for Republican Warren G. Harding from Ohio. He was a senator and a newspaper editor. When the 19th Amendment passed, it passed with 80% Republican support. Democrats were actually filibustering because they didn't want the 19th Amendment. So that's a little bit of history of the 19th Amendment. Two important women who came before us who helped secure this right were Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Susan B. Anthony was a teacher, she was a Quaker, and she actually was from New York, and she went and illegally voted in the 1872 presidential election. She voted for Republican Ulysses S. Grant, and she got arrested for voting, which is just terrible, and she was convicted by an all-male jury. She was fined $100, and that was Susan B. Anthony's story. And then Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she was a mother of 7 kids. She was sort of the philosopher of the women's suffrage movement, and her father was a lawyer. And these two women did a lot of the hard work, and they formed the NWSA, the National Women's Suffrage Association. There were protests going around America even before the Civil War and after the Civil War for women's suffrage. And in these peaceful protests, by the way, many women were arrested and put in jail and treated very, very brutally in jail. So that's what's neat to look at American history, is to remember the people that came before us that did the hard work to help make America a more freer and prosperous nation, and something our founding fathers said, to make America a more perfect union. So that's a little history. Now, America was not unique in struggling with women voting and women's suffrage. Many other nations like Sweden, France struggled with women's suffrage. In 1893, New Zealand finally granted women the right to vote. In Australia, it was 1902. And then England and Canada also struggled with women voting, but they finally secured women the right to vote during World War I. So here's the question today. Does the 19th Amendment give women the right to vote? The answer is false. It doesn't. So it doesn't give women the right to vote. It secures women the right to vote. Remember, the Constitution did not prohibit women from voting. States did. So the 19th Amendment basically tells the states you can't deny or abridge the right to vote based on sex. The 15th Amendment early on said the same wording, but you can't deny black men, the right to vote based on race. So that's a brief history of the 19th Amendment. If you have any questions, email us at potusabckids@gmail.com. This is Professor POTUS. Thanks for joining us on POTUS ABC Kids. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for listening to POTUS ABC Kids with my dad, Professor POTUS. Please visit our really neat Facebook and Instagram page at POTUS ABC Kids. Until next time, listen to your teacher, be kind to your classmates, and God bless America.